The year is 1939. The world stands on the edge of chaos. From the ashes of the First World War, Europe hoped for peace. But peace was fragile. And in Germany, anger and desperation had given rise to a man whose ambitions would plunge humanity into darkness, Adolf Hitler. At dawn on September 1, 1939, the storm began. German tanks rolled into Poland, their tracks cutting through the soil of a nation unprepared for the terror that was coming. Planes screamed across the sky, dropping bombs on cities and villages alike. Warsaw trembled under the thunder of artillery. Buildings collapsed in clouds of dust. Families fled into the countryside, clutching what little they could carry. Children cried for parents who could no longer answer. Britain and France declared war. But their words were powerless against the speed of Hitler's blitzkrieg, lightning war. Nations fell in weeks. Poland was crushed. Soon Denmark, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, all toppled like dominoes. For millions of innocent civilians, life was reduced to a single question: how long can we survive? In France, families boarded trains, desperate to escape the oncoming storm. In Belgium, villages burned. And across the continent, fear settled like a heavy fog. Yet even in those first terrible days, sparks of courage flickered. Resistance fighters, priests, school teachers, and farmers, ordinary people, hid refugees, passed secret messages, and prayed that somehow, this nightmare would end. By the summer of 1940, Hitler's gaze turned toward his greatest prize, Britain. Across the English Channel, the people of London braced themselves. They had seen what had happened to Warsaw and Paris. They knew what was coming. It began with the roar of engines in the sky. Hundreds of German bombers crossed the Channel and unleashed fire upon the cities below. London, Coventry, Liverpool, night after night, they burned. The world would call it the Blitz. For the people who lived it, it was survival in the dark. Families huddled in underground shelters, clutching each other as explosions shook the earth. Children carried gas masks instead of toys. Streets turned to rubble. Cathedrals, schools, homes, all swallowed by flames. And yet, Britain did not fall. Above the clouds, young pilots of the Royal Air Force fought back. They flew Spitfires and Hurricanes, outnumbered, exhausted, but unyielding. Churchill called them the few, and because of them, Britain survived. The Blitz tested not just military strength, but human spirit. And in those months of fire and rubble, the people of Britain found a courage that inspired the free world. But Hitler's hunger only grew. He turned east, to a land vast and cold, the Soviet Union. In June 1941, Operation Barbarossa began. 3 million German soldiers surged into Soviet territory in the largest invasion in human history. Villages vanished. Armies were crushed. The Eastern Front became a furnace of death. And while the war raged in Europe, across the Pacific, another empire was preparing for its own conquest. December 7, 1941. A quiet Sunday morning in Hawaii. The sun rose over Pearl Harbor, where American battleships rested in calm waters. Then came the sound, the terrible roar of engines. Waves of Japanese planes descended, dropping torpedoes and bombs. Battleships exploded, men leapt into burning waters, and the harbor was consumed by fire. America, which had stood apart from Europe's war, was now thrust into it. President Franklin D. Roosevelt called it a date which will live in infamy. Now, the world was fully at war. In the Pacific, Japan struck swiftly, Hong Kong, Singapore, the Philippines. Across Asia, cities fell under the rising sun. In Europe, Hitler's armies marched deeper into Russia, and in secret, behind barbed wire, the darkest chapter of all unfolded, the Holocaust. Millions of Jews, Roma, and prisoners were rounded up and sent to camps. Families were torn apart. Smoke rose from the chimneys of Auschwitz, Treblinka, and countless others, smoke that carried the ashes of innocence. This was not just war. It was genocide. Yet even in darkness, humanity refused to die. In ghettos, people resisted. In forests, partisans fought back. Hope survived, even when life did not. By 1942, the war raged on every continent. In the Atlantic, Allied convoys fought to keep supply lines open, hunted by German U-boats. In North Africa, British and Commonwealth forces battled Rommel's Afrika Korps under a merciless sun. And in the Pacific, the tide began to turn. At Midway, American forces struck back, sinking 4 Japanese carriers. It was the first major Allied victory against Japan, and it changed everything. But the bloodiest battles were still to come. In the East, a city became a symbol of endurance, Stalingrad. The summer of 1942 saw the German army push into the heart of the Soviet Union. The city on the Volga River turned into hell on earth. Street by street, building by building, soldiers fought with knives, shovels, bare hands. The air was filled with dust, fire, and screams. When winter came, the Red Army struck back. Trapped and starving, the German Sixth Army surrendered. Over 300,000 Axis troops were lost. Stalingrad marked the beginning of the end for Hitler's empire. Meanwhile, in North Africa, the tide turned again. At El Alamein in late 1942, the desert shook with the thunder of tanks and artillery. Rommel's advance was halted. The Allies pushed west, and soon North Africa was theirs. From there, the road to Europe opened. In 1943, the Allies invaded Sicily, then Italy. Mussolini's regime crumbled, and Rome was liberated. The fight for Europe had begun in earnest. By 1944, the Allies prepared for the most daring mission of all, the liberation of Western Europe. The plan: invade Nazi-occupied France. The name: Operation Overlord. June 6, 1944. D-Day. The largest amphibious invasion in history. Thousands of ships crossed the English Channel. As dawn broke, young men stormed the beaches of Normandy under relentless machine gun fire. Omaha, Utah, Juno, Sword, Gold, names forever etched in blood. Bodies fell. The sea turned red. Yet they pressed forward. By nightfall, the Allies had gained a foothold in France. Europe had hope again. From Normandy, Allied forces pushed east. France was liberated. Paris was free once more. And in the east, the Red Army advanced relentlessly, driving the Germans back toward Berlin. By early 1945, Hitler's empire was collapsing. Allied bombs rained down on German cities. The once mighty war machine was in ruins. Inside his bunker, beneath the shattered streets of Berlin, Hitler ranted and refused to surrender. In April, Soviet troops stormed the capital. The streets ran with gunfire and desperation. And on April 30, 1945, Adolf Hitler took his own life. A week later, Germany surrendered. In Europe, the war was over. But across the world, the battle raged on. In the Pacific, Japan refused to surrender. Island by island, the Allies fought brutal battles, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, each costing tens of thousands of lives. Then came a decision that would change humanity forever. August 6, 1945. A single American bomber flew over the Japanese city of Hiroshima. The bomb it dropped carried more destructive power than the world had ever seen. In seconds, the city vanished beneath a mushroom cloud. 3 days later, Nagasaki suffered the same fate. The atomic age had begun. And with it, the war ended. Japan surrendered. After 6 years, 50 million dead, and a world forever scarred, silence finally fell. Across continents, people emerged from the ruins, broken but breathing. Refugees searched for homes that no longer existed. Soldiers returned with haunted eyes. Survivors of the camps stared into the sunlight, free but forever changed. Cities rebuilt. Nations healed. And from the ashes of war, new alliances formed, the United Nations, a fragile promise that humanity would never again walk this road. But the scars remained. The lessons of World War II were written in blood, in bravery, and in loss. It was a war that showed the depths of cruelty and the heights of courage. A war that destroyed empires, but also gave birth to hope. And though generations have passed, the echo of that time still lingers, in memorials, in stories, in silence. Because the Second World War was not just fought by soldiers, it was endured by humanity. And it reminds us, even today, that peace is not a gift. It is something we must fight for, every single day.